The message from Galactic Defense Force headquarters had arrived with all the subtlety of a thermobaric warhead. Earth, the newest member of the Interplanetary Alliance, was required to send a representative to complete the standardized combat readiness assessment. No exceptions, no delays. Senior Sergeant Lena, Lockjaw Hayes, stared out the viewport of the transport shuttle as it approached the massive GDF orbit station. At 42, the former U.S. Marine Force recon operator had seen enough combat to last several lifetimes. 23 years of service, 14 deployments, and a collection of scars that told stories she'd rather forget. This was supposed to be her final mission before retirement, a simple diplomatic formality to satisfy the Alliance's bureaucratic requirements. "Approaching Docking Bay 7, announced the pilot. "Prepare for gravity adjustment." Lena tightened her harness as the shuttle's artificial gravity synchronized with the station's. Her joints protested with familiar pops and creaks. The doctors had recommended full cybernetic replacements for her left knee and right shoulder. But she'd refused. Old school to the bone, literally. A small delegation awaited her arrival. The most prominent figure was clearly not human. Tall, with iridescent blue skin and 4 arms that moved with unsettling precision. Senior Sergeant Hayes of Earth," the alien said, voice resonating with a metallic undertone. "I am Captain Archon of the Pell Collective, assessment supervisor for your evaluation cycle. Welcome to Readiness Station Gamma 9. Lena straightened to attention and offered a crisp salute. "Thank you, Captain. Ready to complete this assessment and return to Earth." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Archon's features. "Indeed. The Alliance appreciates Earth's participation in this standard procedure." He gestured toward the corridor. "Your quarantine and adaptation period begins immediately. The full assessment cycle commences in 36 standard hours." As they walked through the sterile corridors, Lena observed other beings, some humanoid, others decidedly not, engaged in various activities. Many wore the distinctive black and silver uniforms of GDF personnel, while others were dressed in what appeared to be specialized training gear. "Captain," Lena said, keeping her voice neutral, "my briefing was somewhat limited. What exactly does this assessment entail?" Archon's 4 hands made a complex gesture that Lena couldn't interpret. "The standardized combat readiness assessment evaluates the baseline capabilities of all member species. As Earth's representative, you will undergo a series of environmental tolerance tests, combat simulations, psychological evaluations, and tactical response scenarios." "Sounds straightforward enough," Lena replied, though something in Archon's tone made her uneasy. "We selected you as Earth's representative because your physical and psychological profiles align closely with your species' statistical average." Archon continued. "The data we collect will establish the baseline for all future human integration into GDF operations." Lena frowned. Average? 23 years of special operations had pushed her far beyond any definition of average she was familiar with. But to these aliens, perhaps all humans looked the same. They arrived at a small but efficiently designed living quarter. "These will be your accommodations," Archon said. "Rest and acclimate. The medical team will arrive shortly to establish your baseline biometrics." After the captain departed, Lena sat heavily on the narrow bed. So this was it. Her final mission. Complete some alien fitness test. Establish that humans weren't completely useless in space. And then retire to that cabin in Montana she'd been dreaming about for the past decade. Simple. The medical examination lasted 3 hours and involved equipment Lena had never seen before. Beams of light that penetrated her body. Fields that measured something the technicians called quantum cellular resonance, and a particularly unpleasant blood extraction process that somehow drew samples from multiple points simultaneously. "Remarkable density in the muscular structure," commented one technician, a willowy being with translucent skin through which Lena could see pulsing organs. And the neural pathways show significant adaptation to combat stress. The redundancy in their vital systems is quite primitive, but effective in its way, said another, this one resembling an upright reptile with multiple eyes. Note the scarring throughout, evidence of repeated trauma and recovery. They spoke as if she weren't present, or perhaps couldn't understand them. Lena remained silent, observing their reactions and storing away information. It was clear they considered humans to be technologically and biologically inferior. Interesting specimens, but hardly equals. After the examination, she was escorted to a large, circular chamber where several other beings were gathered. Based on their attire and demeanor, Lena surmised these were fellow assessment participants. A massive figure approached her, nearly 8 feet tall with gray-green skin that looked like granite. "So you are the human," it rumbled in heavily accented standard. "I am Kurgan, of the Groth Imperium. Your species is new to space, yes?" Lena nodded. "Relatively speaking, I'm Lena Hayes." Kurgan's rocky features twisted into what might have been a smile. "The assessments are designed to eliminate the weak. The Groth have participated in 17 cycles. We always dominate the physical trials." "Congratulations," Lena replied dryly. Another participant drifted toward them, this one moving with unsettling grace. Slender and tall, with 4 arms like Archon, but with glittering silver skin that seemed to shift colors with movement. "Physical prowess is merely one aspect of the assessment," the newcomer said, voice melodic. "I am Tira, of the Tenari Conclave. Our people excel in the cognitive and tactical portions." 4 violet eyes studied Lena with undisguised curiosity. "Humans are an unknown quantity. Your species has achieved spaceflight and atomic energy, yet still relies heavily on biological soldiers rather than autonomous combat systems. Fascinating." Before Lena could respond, a loud tone reverberated through the chamber, and Captain Arkin entered with several other officials. "Attention, assessment participants," Archon announced. "Final preparations are complete. The standardized combat readiness assessment will commence at 0600 tomorrow. You are the 17th assessment group in this cycle, representing 12 member species and 3 probationary applicants." His gaze settled briefly on Lena. "The assessment consists of 5 phases, over 7 standard days. Results will establish combat readiness classifications and specialized deployment recommendations for your respective species." Lena listened carefully as Arkin outlined the general structure of the assessment. Environmental adaptation trials, weapons proficiency, tactical decision-making, physical endurance, and psychological resilience. Standard evaluation categories for any military, though she suspected the alien versions would differ significantly from Earth's. That night, as she lay on the too-firm bed in her quarters, Lena reviewed what she'd learned. The other participants were clearly taking this very seriously. This wasn't just a bureaucratic checkbox for them, but a matter of pride and standing within the Alliance. And based on their reactions to her presence, expectations for human performance were low. Fine by her. Being underestimated was an advantage she'd exploited throughout her career. Complete the assessment, establish a respectable baseline for humanity, and then retire. 7 days, 5 phases, 1 last mission. The first day began with environmental tolerance testing. Participants were escorted to a massive chamber, filled with various enclosed environments, transparent pods containing different atmospheric conditions, gravity levels, and temperature extremes. "Phase 1 evaluates adaptability to combat environments," explained a Pell technician as he fitted Lena with a lightweight bodysuit covered in sensors. "The suit will monitor your physiological responses, but provides no protection. Each environment represents conditions encountered on Alliance worlds or during space operations." Lena nodded, eyeing the pods with professional interest. "Duration?" "Each environment requires 15 minutes of functional capacity," The technician replied. If your vitals indicate critical failure, the chamber will automatically extract you. The first environment was extreme heat, a simulation of a Class 4 desert planet. The moment Lena entered, she felt the scorching air sear her lungs. The temperature display read 60 centigrades with 5% humidity. Brutal, but not unlike certain training scenarios she'd endured in Death Valley and the Middle East. She regulated her breathing, minimizing moisture loss, and completed the required tasks, simple physical exercises and cognitive tests on a floating interface. When the 15 minutes ended, she emerged drenched in sweat, but stable. The Groth participant, Kurgan, had completed the same challenge without apparent discomfort. Your species perspires excessively, he observed as Lena toweled off. Inefficient water management. Lena shrugged. Gets the job done. The next pod contained the opposite extreme, bitter cold that instantly crystallized the sweat on her skin. 40-degree Celsius with high winds. Again, brutal but familiar territory for someone who'd trained in Arctic conditions. Her fingers grew numb as she manipulated the test objects, but she maintained functionality. What followed was a methodical progression through increasingly hostile environments. Crushing pressure that made her ears pop and her joints scream. Toxic atmospheres that burned her eyes and throat, despite the breathing apparatus provided. Low oxygen that left her lightheaded, and radiation levels that caused immediate nausea. Through each test, Lena relied on techniques honed through years of special operations training. Compartmentalize the pain. Focus on the immediate task. Control your breathing, 1 minute at a time. By the end of Phase 1, several participants had been extracted due to physiological distress, including one who suffered severe radiation burns after removing protective equipment prematurely. The officials observed with clinical detachment, recording data without comment. To Lena's satisfaction, she had completed each environment without extraction. As she removed the sensor suit, she noticed Captain Archon studying a holographic display of her results with what appeared to be surprise. "Problem, Captain?" she asked. Archon's forearms made that complex gesture again. "Not at all. Sergeant Hayes, your performance was unexpected, particularly in the radiation and pressure chambers." "We train for all environments on Earth," Lena said simply. "Indeed." Archon's tone suggested this explanation was insufficient, but he offered nothing more. Phase 2 begins tomorrow at 600. Weapons proficiency and combat systems integration. That evening, the atmosphere among the participants had shifted subtly. Where before, they had largely ignored the human in their midst. Now, she received evaluating glances and quiet discussions that ceased when she approached. Tira, the four-armed Tenari, seated herself across from Lena in the communal dining area. "You surprised them today," she said without preamble. The assessment administrators expected humans to require extraction from at least 3 environments. Lena continued eating the bland protein supplement that apparently constituted a universal meal. "Why's that?" "Your species lacks the evolutionary adaptations and technological integration that most Alliance members possess," Tira explained. "The Groth evolved on a high radiation world. My people can regulate our body temperature at the cellular level. The Pell can survive in vacuum for short periods." She tilted her head. "Yet you completed all trials through what appeared to be sheer biological endurance." "We're stubborn that way," Lena replied. Tira's silver skin rippled with what might have been amusement. "So it seems. Tomorrow will be different. However, Phase 2 favors those with neural interface capabilities and advanced weapons training. Earth's projectile weapons technology is considered quaint." Lena smiled thinly. "I'll manage." Phase 2 proved more challenging than environmental testing, but not in the ways Lena had anticipated. The weapons themselves, energy-based rifles and sidearms, sonic disruptors, gravitational manipulators, were unfamiliar. But the principles of marksmanship remained constant: stance, grip, breathing, trigger control. What surprised her was how many participants struggled with these fundamentals. Despite their advanced technology, many Alliance species had apparently delegated basic combat skills to automated systems for so long that the physical act of aiming and firing had become almost ceremonial. In the targeting assessments, Lena's scores placed her in the top tier, behind only the representatives from species with enhanced visual capabilities or additional limbs. The GDF officials made no attempt to hide their astonishment. "Your accuracy with unfamiliar weapon systems is remarkable," commented one evaluator, a being with multiple stalked eyes. "Especially without neural interface assistance. Iron sights and mechanical triggers aren't so different across the galaxy, it seems," Lena replied. The close-quarters combat assessment followed, and here Lena's experience truly shone. While other species relied on technological advantages or natural weapons, decades of hand-to-hand combat training had ingrained in her a fluidity of movement and tactical awareness that technology couldn't replicate. Against the combat drones used for assessment, she employed modified techniques from her marine training, adjusting for the different center of gravity and articulation points of the humanoid machines. By the end of the session, she had disabled 17 drones, a number surpassed only by Kurgan, whose natural strength allowed him to simply tear the machines apart. The Groth warrior approached her afterward, his stone-like features unreadable. "You fight well for a species with such soft flesh," he said, which Lena took as a compliment. "Thanks. You're pretty handy yourself." Kurgan rumbled what might have been a laugh. "The next trial involves combat vehicle operation. Does your species use such technology?" "We've been known to," Lena replied, thinking of the countless vehicles she'd operated over her career, from Humvees to attack helicopters. The simulated combat vehicle proved to be a cross between an aircraft and an armored personnel carrier, capable of both atmospheric and space operations. Participants were required to power up the system, navigate a complex three-dimensional obstacle course, engage moving targets, and safely extract a simulated casualty. Lena had never seen controls like these before, but the basic principles of flight hadn't changed: thrust, lift, maneuverability. She made several errors initially, overcorrecting and nearly colliding with an obstacle, but quickly adjusted. By the end of the course, she was handling the craft with growing confidence, completing the extraction with minimal damage to the vehicle. Not her best performance, but far from her worst. And based on the results displayed on the central scoreboard, still within the upper half of participants. The final element of Phase 2 was tactical systems integration. Essentially, the ability to interface with and direct automated combat platforms. Here, Lena faced a significant disadvantage. Most Alliance species had developed neural interface capabilities, allowing direct mental control of drones and weapon systems. Humans, with their primitive technology, relied on physical controls and command inputs. She was provided with a manual interface, a complex array of holographic controls that required both physical gestures and vocal commands. It was clumsy and slow compared to the neural connections others used. But Lena adapted, focusing on anticipating enemy movements rather than trying to match their speed of response. Her squad of combat drones suffered heavy losses in the simulated engagement, but achieved their tactical objectives through coordinated maneuvers that maximized their limited capabilities. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective, a philosophy that had defined much of her military career. As Phase 2 concluded, Lena noticed increased attention from the GDF officials. They huddled around displays, comparing data and engaging in animated discussions while occasionally glancing in her direction. Captain Arkin approached as she was removing the tactical interface harness. "Your performance continues to defy projections, Sergeant Hayes." "Is that good or bad, Captain?" "It is significant," Archon replied carefully. The combat readiness assessment was designed based on data from established Alliance species. Earth's recent admission means our models for human capability were theoretical. Your results suggest these models require substantial revision. Lena suppressed a smile. Happy to help improve your data. Archon studied her with an intensity that was slightly unsettling. May I ask a personal query, Sergeant? Go ahead. You were selected as representative of human average capability. Yet your performance indicates exceptional capacity by any measure. How do you account for this discrepancy? Lena considered the question. With respect, Captain, I suspect your definition of average and mine differ. I'm not enhanced or augmented in any way, if that's what you're asking. Just well-trained and experienced. Experience, Archon repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar concept. Yes, your file indicates extensive combat deployment. The Alliance tends to value technological advancement over such traditional factors. He made a gesture that might have been dismissive. Phase 3 begins tomorrow. Psychological resilience and stress response. I suggest you rest thoroughly. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. Something about Archon's reaction bothered her. The GDF officials seemed genuinely surprised by her performance, which suggested they had seriously underestimated human capabilities. Or perhaps, they had underestimated the value of experience and training compared to technological enhancement. Either way, she was no longer just going through the motions of a bureaucratic exercise. She was representing Earth, all of humanity, to beings who apparently considered them primitive curiosities at best. The responsibility weighed on her more heavily than she had anticipated. Phase 3 began with sleep deprivation, a familiar companion for any special operator. Participants were kept awake for 36 hours, while undergoing continuous cognitive testing and physical challenges. Lena fell back on techniques she'd learned in SEER training, using controlled microsleep during brief periods of inactivity and mental mathematics to maintain alertness. The psychological testing was more invasive than anything she'd experienced on Earth. Machines that somehow detected and amplified emotional responses. Simulations designed to trigger specific trauma responses. And scenarios that forced impossible ethical choices. During one particularly grueling session, Lena was placed in a virtual environment that recreated, with disturbing accuracy, an ambush she'd survived in her third deployment. The system had somehow extracted this memory from her brain scans and reconstructed it in perfect detail, down to the faces of the squad members she'd lost that day. Fighting through the simulation while clinical observers monitored her stress responses was among the hardest things she'd ever done. But rage carried her through. Rage at the invasion of her memories, at the clinical exploitation of her trauma, at the casual cruelty of the test designers. When she emerged, shaking with adrenaline and barely suppressed fury, she found Tira waiting outside the chamber. That was unnecessarily cruel, the Tenari said quietly. Even by assessment standards. Lena wiped sweat from her face, trying to control her breathing. Is that your professional opinion? It is my personal one, Tira replied. The psychological evaluators believe that technological species without neural safeguards are particularly vulnerable to trauma-based psychological manipulation. Your performance suggests otherwise. We're used to dealing with our demons the old-fashioned way, Lena said. Tira's silver skin rippled. Indeed. It has not escaped notice that several participants have withdrawn following their psychological assessments. Yet you continue. The officials find this perplexing. The isolation tests that followed were almost a relief compared to the memory simulations. Sensory deprivation, temporal disorientation, and simulated abandonment scenarios were standard fare in special operations training. Lena used the time to mentally recover from the earlier ordeal, floating in the isolation tank with practiced calm. The final element of Phase 3 was perhaps the most unexpected, a cooperative scenario requiring participants to work in mixed-species teams to solve complex problems under extreme stress conditions. Lena found herself grouped with Kurgan and a serpentine being named Selith, from a species she hadn't encountered before. Their task was to navigate a maze-like structure filled with environmental hazards, extract critical data from multiple terminals, and reach an extraction point within a punishingly short time frame. Success required leveraging each team member's strengths while compensating for their weaknesses. Kurgan's brute strength and resistance to physical damage made him ideal for clearing obstacles and handling the most hostile environments. Selith's flexibility and sensitivity to electromagnetic fields helped navigate the confusing layout. Lena, with her tactical experience, coordinated their efforts and made rapid adjustments as conditions changed. What began as an uneasy alliance evolved into something approaching effective teamwork as they progressed through the challenge. When Selith was injured by an unexpected energy discharge, Lena's battlefield first aid skills, applied with creative modifications for alien physiology, kept the serpentine being functional. When a security system trapped Lena behind a force field, Kurgan's surprising technical knowledge, belying his warrior appearance, freed her. They reached the extraction point with seconds to spare, data secured, and team intact. As they recovered in the debriefing area, Lena realized something had changed in how her alien teammates regarded her. There was a newfound respect in Kurgan's rumbling voice, a thoughtful consideration in Selith's geometric pupil contractions. "You performed well under pressure," Kurgan acknowledged. "The Groth values strength, but coordination is equally important in battle. Your species understands this. My analysis indicates that your tactical decisions reduced our completion time by approximately 24%, added Selith, voice a sibilant whisper. Most efficient. As Phase 3 concluded, Lena noticed a shift in the overall atmosphere of the assessment. The remaining participants, roughly half the original number, now interacted more freely across species lines, sharing observations and comparing experiences. She found herself included in these exchanges, sought out for her perspective on the challenges they'd faced. Captain Archon observed these developments with what appeared to be satisfaction. "Interesting dynamics emerging," he commented, when Lena approached him with a question about the next phase. "The assessment measures individual capabilities, but also reveals potential for interspecies cooperation. That seems valuable for a multi-species defense force," Lena noted. "Indeed. More valuable than many realize." Archon's four arms made a gesture that Lena was beginning to interpret as thoughtful consideration. Phase 4 begins tomorrow, full combat simulation. It will integrate all previous elements into a comprehensive, operational scenario. Lena nodded, already mentally preparing. "What's the objective?" "That information is part of the assessment, Sergeant Hayes," Archon replied, with what might have been amusement. "You will deploy without prior intelligence, as often occurs in actual combat operations." Phase 4 was exactly as advertised, a brutally realistic combat simulation that combined environmental challenges, weapons proficiency, psychological pressure, and tactical decision-making into a seamless whole. Participants were divided into two opposing forces, given minimal equipment, and released into a massive environment chamber that could reconfigure itself to represent different terrains. Lena found herself assigned to a 5-member team that included Tira and 3 beings she knew only superficially. Their opponents, led by Kurgan, had a slight advantage in numbers and included several participants with specialized sensory capabilities. The scenario itself was elegantly simple. Capture and hold 3 objective points for a cumulative time of 30 minutes within a 4-hour operation window. The environment would shift every hour, forcing tactical adjustments. Lena's team elected her as tactical leader after a brief discussion, a decision that surprised her, but reflected the growing recognition of her combat experience. She quickly assessed her team's capabilities and developed a strategy that played to their strengths. Conventional approach won't work against superior numbers and sensors, she explained, sketching a rough map on the ground. We'll use asymmetric tactics, hit and fade, false flag operations, and environmental manipulation. The first terrain was dense jungle, massive alien vegetation with peculiar properties that affected visibility and movement. Rather than directly assaulting objectives, Lena's team created distractions that drew their opponents into prepared ambush points, using the dense foliage as concealment. When the environment shifted to urban ruins, they adapted, using the vertical dimension to establish overwatch positions and channeling enemies into crossfire zones. In the third phase, an open desert with minimal cover, they went nocturnal, operating during the simulated night cycle when several of their opponents' sensory advantages were reduced. Throughout the operation, Lena found herself falling back on hard-earned lessons from her deployments. The specific environment and adversaries might be alien, but the fundamentals of small unit tactics remained constant. Know your team's capabilities, understand the terrain, maintain communications, and adapt to changing conditions. By the final hour, her team held 2 of 3 objectives, despite being outnumbered. Kurgan's forces had adapted to their tactics and mounted increasingly coordinated counterattacks, forcing Lena to continuously revise their approach. The final confrontation came at the central objective, a raised platform surrounded by open ground that offered minimal cover. Kurgan himself led the assault, using his natural resilience to absorb fire while advancing. It was a sound tactic against conventional defense. But Lena had anticipated this move. Rather than defending the platform directly, her team had rigged the surrounding area with improvised devices that altered the environmental controls. When Kurgan's team committed to their charge, Tira activated the system, instantly transforming the open ground into a knee-deep morass that dramatically slowed their advance. Caught in the open with their mobility restricted, Kurgan's team suffered heavy, simulated casualties. By the time they extracted and regrouped, Lena's team had secured the time needed on the objective to achieve victory. As the simulation ended and the environment chamber reset to neutral configuration, participants emerged exhausted but energized by the experience. Even Kurgan acknowledged the effectiveness of Lena's strategy with a respectful nod. The mud was unexpected. The massive groth rumbled. A primitive but effective tactic. Lena grinned. Sometimes the old ways work best. The assessment officials reviewed the combat data with intense interest, replaying key moments and analyzing decision points. Captain Arkin personally debriefed Lena's team, focusing particularly on the environmental manipulation that had secured their victory. A creative application of available resources, he noted. Most participants focus on direct force application, rather than terrain modification. We call it combat engineering, Lena explained. Been a part of warfare on Earth since the first defensive ditch was dug. Archon made a notation on his display. Your species' historical combat experience continues to yield unexpected insights. He hesitated, then added, The final phase begins tomorrow. Be prepared for escalation. That cryptic warning proved accurate. Phase 5, the integrated operations scenario, was designed to push participants beyond their established limits. It combined all previous elements while continuously increasing difficulty, changing parameters, and introducing unexpected variables. Participants operated individually, but within a connected virtual battle space. Each assigned mission objectives that occasionally conflicted with others, forcing complex prioritization decisions. The simulation included environmental extremes, equipment failures, simulated injuries, and psychological stressors, all simultaneously, rather than sequentially as in previous phases. For Lena, the experience was eerily reminiscent of her worst combat deployments, the ones where everything went wrong at once and survival depended on moment-to-moment adaptation. As the simulation progressed, She found herself drawing deeper on her experiential reservoir, applying lessons learned through 2 decades of real-world operations. When her primary weapon malfunctioned during an ambush, she seamlessly transitioned to improvised explosives created from environmental materials. When extreme cold impaired her movement, she maintained operational capability through controlled breathing techniques and continuous motion. When isolation and sleep deprivation began affecting her decision-making, she implemented the mental checklist procedure drilled into her during special operations training. Hour after punishing hour, the simulation intensified. Several participants withdrew after sustaining simulated injuries that would have been debilitating in real combat. Others reached psychological breaking points when confronted with impossible tactical situations. By the final stage, only a handful remained active. Lena was navigating a particularly challenging section, a zero-gravity environment filled with toxic gas and electromagnetic interference, when she encountered Tira. The Tenari was clearly struggling, her silver skin dull and movements uncoordinated. "Radiation effects," Tira managed, her melodic voice distorted. "My protective fields are failing." Without hesitation, Lena modified her approach, integrating Tira's mission objectives with her own. Working together, they established a mutual support system, Lena handling the physical challenges, while Tira managed navigational calculations that the radiation was making increasingly difficult for her specialized brain structure. They reached the final extraction point together, completing both their objectives despite the simulation throwing increasingly desperate obstacles in their path. As the environment chamber powered down and medical teams entered to check participants, Lena realized she was grinning despite her exhaustion. It had been a hell of a challenge, exactly the kind of impossible scenario she'd specialized in throughout her career. Captain Arkan approached as the medical team was treating Lena's simulation burns, superficial injuries designed to replicate combat damage without causing permanent harm. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, his tone different than in previous interactions. "The assessment committee requests your presence once medical treatment is complete." Lena nodded, too tired for questions. After the medics finished, she followed Archon to a conference room where several senior officials waited. Their expressions, insofar as alien features could be interpreted, suggested a mixture of confusion and interest. A being Lena hadn't seen before addressed her. Unlike the others, this alien wore elaborate insignia that suggested high rank. Senior Sergeant Hayes," it said, voice resonating with harmonic undertones. "I am Admiral Zenith, Assessment Command Supervisor. Your performance during this evaluation cycle has been unprecedented." Lena straightened to attention despite her fatigue. "Thank you, Admiral." "It is not necessarily a compliment," Zenith continued. "It is an observation that requires explanation. You were selected as representative of human average capability, yet your results exceed the highest performance metrics in several categories. This statistical anomaly demands investigation." "With respect, Admiral," Lena replied, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about what constitutes average for human combat personnel." Zenith made a gesture to a subordinate, who activated a holographic display showing Lena's assessment data alongside comparative metrics. "Your environmental tolerance exceeds projected human maximums by 42%, Zenith stated. "Your tactical adaptation rate is 78% above baseline for technological species. Your psychological resilience metrics are quite literally off our established scale." The Admiral's multifaceted eyes focused on Lena with disturbing intensity. "Explain." Lena studied the data, understanding the source of their confusion. "Admiral, these projections appear to be based on human physiological capabilities, without accounting for training and experience. I've spent 23 years as a special operations combatant, with extensive deployment in extreme environments. What you're seeing isn't enhanced capability, it's optimized standard capability." Impossible, declared another official. No biological organism approaches theoretical maximum performance without technological augmentation or genetic modification. Humans do, Lena stated simply, through training, conditioning, and most importantly, experience. Captain Arkin intervened. Admiral, my analysis supports Sergeant Hayes' assertion. The assessment data reveals a pattern consistent with experiential optimization rather than augmentation. Human combat methodology appears to prioritize adaptability and resilience over specialized capability. Admiral Zenith made a complex gesture that seemed to indicate frustration. If accurate, this has significant implications for Alliance combat doctrine. Our current models emphasize technological enhancement and genetic specialization. The resource investment in training to achieve similar results is considered inefficient. Efficiency isn't everything in combat, Lena noted. Sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is the ability to function effectively when all technology fails. The room fell silent as the officials contemplated this perspective. Finally, Admiral Zenith addressed Lena directly. Sergeant Hayes, your assessment results will require extensive analysis and recalibration of our models for human integration into GDF operations. In light of these findings, I am authorized to offer you a position as Human Combat Integration Specialist, with operational authority to develop training protocols for mixed species units. Lena blinked in surprise. This was far from the perfunctory completion of the assessment she had anticipated. Admiral, I'm scheduled to retire upon return to Earth. My service commitment is complete. Consider the strategic implications, Zenith pressed. Your species has just joined the Alliance. Humans are perceived as technologically inferior by many member species. Yet you have demonstrated capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness. Your experience could significantly enhance humanity's standing and security within the Alliance structure. It was a compelling argument, appealing directly to Lena's sense of duty. She had planned to leave military service behind, to finally rest after decades of continuous operations. But this was something different, a chance to ensure humans weren't underestimated or misused within the Alliance military structure. What exactly would this position entail? She asked cautiously. Captain Arkin responded. You would serve as advisor to the Combat Readiness Division, developing integrated training protocols that incorporate human methodologies. Additionally, you would participate in the assessment redesign to better evaluate the full spectrum of combat capabilities across species. Not retirement, but not direct combat either, Lena mused. A chance to put 2 decades of hard-earned lessons to use on a larger scale. Precisely, confirmed Admiral Zenith. Your experience represents a valuable resource that could benefit the entire Alliance. Lena thought of the cabin in Montana, the quiet life she had planned for so long. Then she thought of humans entering Alliance service without proper preparation or understanding of their capabilities, led by aliens who considered them primitive curiosities. I'll need certain guarantees, she said finally. Operational authority over human integration training, direct input on deployment protocols, and regular review of combat readiness standards. Admiral Zenith's features shifted in what might have been surprise at her negotiating position. After a brief consultation with the other officials, the Admiral agreed. Your terms are acceptable, though unprecedented for a non-command rank individual. We will formalize the arrangement pending completion of your assessment cycle. The assessment isn't complete? Lena asked, surprised. One final element remains, Captain Arkin explained. The assessment concludes with a formal ceremony and results presentation to all participants. It is scheduled for tomorrow at 0800. The ceremony was held in a vast amphitheater aboard the station, with all participants, even those who had withdrawn, in attendance. Each species representatives were called forward to receive their assessment classifications and deployment recommendations. When Lena's turn came, Admiral Zenith personally presented her results. Senior Sergeant Lena Hayes of Earth, the Admiral announced to the assembled audience. Assessment classification, Elite Operational Specialist, with distinction in tactical adaptation and environmental resilience. Deployment recommendation, Command Advisory Staff with specialization in integrated combat methodology. The announcement caused a ripple of reaction through the audience. It was apparently an unprecedented classification for a first-cycle participant, especially from a newly admitted species. As Lena accepted the formal documentation, she noticed Kurgan and Tira watching from their respective delegations. The massive Groth offered what might have been a salute, while Tira's silver skin rippled in what Lena had come to recognize as approval. Captain Archon approached as the ceremony concluded. Congratulations, Sergeant Hayes, or perhaps I should say Specialist Hayes, given your new appointment. Thank you, Captain, Lena replied, though I suspect the real work is just beginning. Indeed. The Combat Readiness Division has already requested your input on revisions to the assessment protocols. Your demonstration of experience-based capability has challenged certain assumptions. Lena smiled, always happy to shake things up a bit. I believe you will do more than that, Archon said, his tone serious. The Alliance has grown complacent in its reliance on technology and genetic specialization. Your performance suggests alternative paths to combat effectiveness, paths that many member species have forgotten or abandoned. Sometimes the old ways still work, Lena observed. Precisely. And in times of conflict, adaptability often determines survival. Archon made a gesture that Lena now recognized as respect. I look forward to our collaboration. Specialist Hayes. As Lena prepared to depart the assessment station for her new assignment at GDF headquarters, she received unexpected visitors, Kurgan and Tira, along with several other participants she had encountered during the trials. We came to offer congratulations, Tira explained, and to express interest in your future training protocols. Kurgan nodded his massive head. The Groth Imperium has authorized me to serve as liaison to your integration program. We believe there is merit in your methodologies. Similar sentiments were expressed by the others, representatives of various Alliance species who had observed or experienced Lena's approach firsthand. What had begun as a simple assessment had somehow catalyzed interest in human combat techniques across multiple member worlds. Lena regarded her unlikely allies with newfound appreciation. She had entered the assessment expecting to complete a bureaucratic requirement before retirement. Instead, she found herself at the beginning of a new mission, one that might reshape Alliance military doctrine and secure humanity's place among the stars. Not bad for an average human soldier. As her transport prepared to depart for GDF headquarters, Lena took a final look at the assessment station through the viewport. The massive structure represented everything she had initially resented. An alien bureaucracy that had delayed her long-awaited retirement with what seemed like pointless testing. Now she saw it differently, as the beginning of something important. Humanity had joined the galactic community as junior partners, regarded with curiosity at best and condescension at worst. But through the simple application of hard-earned experience and stubborn human resilience, she had begun to change those perceptions. The Montana cabin would have to wait a while longer. She had one more mission to complete, teaching the stars that humans might lack fancy technology and genetic enhancements, but they knew a thing or two about surviving when everything went to hell. After all, they'd been practicing for their entire history.